Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if our furry primate cousins share our complex personalities? It is a question that gets to the heart of what makes us, well, us. Today we're diving into a fascinating debate about whether the way we describe human personalities, the big 5 personality traits, actually works for our closest relatives like chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas, and bonobos. A recent paper suggested that this human model just doesn't fit these amazing animals. But a researcher, Alexander Weiss, thinks that is not quite the full story, and he is here to explain why. So what is the big idea here? For a long time, scientists have been trying to understand personality across different species. In humans, we have this well-established model called the 5-factor model, or the Big 5. It says most of our personalities can be described by 5 broad dimensions: neuroticism, which is about emotional stability; extroversion, about sociability and assertiveness, openness; to experience, about curiosity and creativity; agreeativity, agreeableness, about kindness; and conscientiousness, about organization and self-discipline. Now, the paper we're talking about claims that most researchers studying ape personalities are convinced that these same 5 human factors apply directly to apes. But Weiss says this framing isn't quite accurate. He points out that many comparative psychologists don't actually believe the ape personality factors are identical to human ones. Instead, they see them as having degrees of overlap, but also important differences. This is why researchers deliberately study personality differences across related species. They're not just trying to force a human mold onto animals, they're exploring how personality structures evolve and vary. Think of it like comparing a human arm, a bat wing, and a whale flipper. They're all forelimbs, but they've adapted for very different purposes. Similarly, ape personality traits might share a name with human traits like extroversion, but they can manifest and function differently. So how do scientists test if personality structures are similar across groups? One way is by looking at something called Configural invariance. This basically asks if the same personality traits load onto the same underlying factors in different groups. The paper we're discussing analyzed data from studies that rated chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas, and bonobos on personality traits. It then compared how these traits clustered together in apes versus how they cluster in humans. The results reported in this paper showed that only a small percentage of traits loaded onto matching factors. The author of that paper concluded this meant ape personalities are structurally very different from human personalities, and even different from each other across different ape studies. But Weiss has some serious issues with this analysis. His main critique is that the original studies were not actually trying to prove that the human Big 5 perfectly matches ape personality. They never claimed the factors were identical. So comparing the AP data directly to the human factor structure is kind of like comparing apples and oranges. The statistical tests performed in that paper are therefore not really testing a meaningful hypothesis according to Weiss, because the premise itself is flawed. Another big problem Weiss points out is that the paper sometimes incorrectly assigned which human personality factors certain traits belong to. For example, there's an item called cool. In human personality research, the trait cool is often associated with low extroversion, meaning someone who is reserved. But Weiss explains that in ape personality questionnaires like the ones used to assess chimpanzees and orangutans, the cool item was specifically designed to measure low neuroticism. The description for this item reads subject, seems unaffected by emotions, and is usually undisturbed, assured, and calm. Clearly, this describes someone who is emotionally stable, not necessarily someone who is introverted. So when the paper noted that cool didn't load on extroversion in apes, it was using the wrong benchmark. It actually loaded on the right factor, the one measuring emotional stability, meaning low neuroticism. This misinterpretation also extends to other traits. Let's take the trait bullying. The paper claimed that bullying didn't show consistent loading patterns across different chimpanzee studies. Weiss points out that this is partly due to selective reporting. For instance, one study indeed found bullying related to dominance, but another study related it to neuroticism, and it wasn't included in a couple of others. However, Weiss highlights that what wasn't mentioned is that bullying actually shared a loading with dominance in one of the studies cited. And crucially, when a broader range of studies of chimpanzees are considered, including those of chimpanzees in their natural habitat, bullying consistently loaded with dominance or a similar trait like disagreeableness. Depending on which studies you include, the overlap across chimpanzee studies could be as high as 57%, 71%, or even 86%, far from zero as was implied. This shows that the bullying trait does indeed have a somewhat consistent place in chimpanzee personality structure. There is also a methodological issue. The paper relied on simple percentages of traits loading on the same factor. This method assumes that each trait relates to only one factor. But in reality, personality is complex. Even with highly reliable human personality measures like the neo-PyR traits often load on more than one factor, meaning they have cross-loadings. This assumption of simple structure is unrealistic for personality research. Weiss argues there are more sophisticated statistical methods to compare personality structures. One such method, called targeted orthogonal procrustes rotation, doesn't assume simple structure. It goes further than just checking if traits load on the same factor. It checks if the strength of those loadings is similar across samples. Another property called metric invariance. After applying such methods to compare chimpanzee personality data, with earlier findings researchers found fair to excellent similarity for traits like dominance, extroversion, conscientiousness, and agreeableness. The initial difficulties in finding neuroticism and openness in some studies, it seems, were more likely due to limitations in the specific questionnaires used rather than the absence of these traits in chimpanzees. The paper also questioned whether the trait conscientiousness, a key human personality dimension, is really present in chimpanzees. It suggested that many items loading on factors labeled conscientiousness weren't particularly good markers, and that conscientiousness hadn't been consistently found in other chimpanzee studies. Weiss counters this by citing a study where the same personality questionnaire used for apes was given to humans alongside standard human personality measures. This study found a set of items that clustered together and had good validity in measuring conscientiousness in humans. Crucially, 7 of these 10 items were also markers of conscientiousness in chimpanzees. Some items related to conscientiousness in humans, but not apes, and vice versa, showing that, while the labels might be the same, the specific behaviors contributing to the trait can differ across species. However, the underlying construct seems similar enough. Furthermore, Weiss points out that one of the studies used to doubt conscientiousness actually supports its presence. That study's factor labeled reactivity, undependability correlated strongly and negatively with conscientiousness factors found in other chimpanzee studies. This negative correlation suggests that being undependable is the opposite of being conscientious, a finding that supports the existence of a conscientiousness dimension. Another study cited had a very brief measure of conscientiousness, making it difficult to get a clear picture, and the third study mentioned didn't even include items related to conscientiousness. Beyond just statistical clustering, Weiss emphasizes the importance of looking at real-world outcomes. Just like in humans, chimpanzees, who scored higher on conscientiousness, were more engaged in learning tasks and less likely to give up. This parallels findings in human research where conscientiousness is linked to academic success. This behavioral evidence further strengthens the argument that conscientiousness is a meaningful dimension in chimpanzee personality. Weiss also addresses a few other minor points. For instance, the original paper suggested that certain traits like depressed and erratic might be pathologies created by captivity and not present in wild apes. Weiss clarifies that these traits were excluded from that specific study simply to reduce the burden on the raters, not because they don't exist or are not observed in the wild. Previous research has indeed documented such traits and behaviors in wild chimpanzees. He also clarifies who first suggested the importance of invariance testing, pointing out that he and a colleague proposed this idea in a discussion about another researcher's paper. Ultimately, Weiss argues that the main paper operates under a misunderstanding. Researchers use labels like extroversion for ape personality factors, not because they believe they are identical to human extroversion, but as a hypothesis, it is a starting point for investigation. Just as we call a creature's forelimb an arm, a wing, or a fin, depending on its function, each label for a personality factor in a different species is a hypothesis that needs further testing and refinement. The field of comparative personality research is about exploring these similarities and differences. It is not about proving that all species are the same, but about understanding the diversity and continuity of personality across the animal kingdom. Weiss encourages the development of new and innovative approaches to studying personality in non-human primates. He highlights that finding converging evidence from different measurement methods like behavioral observations and rating scales will greatly enhance our understanding of personality, not just in apes, but in all species, including ourselves. So what is my take on all this? It is a fantastic example of how science progresses through debate and rigorous challenge. The original paper raised important questions about applying human personality models to apes. However, Weiss's commentary is crucial because it points out fundamental flaws in the analysis and interpretation. His explanation that trait labels are hypotheses, not exact replicas, is a key insight. It reminds us that while we share a common ancestry with great apes, their personalities are their own, shaped by their unique environments and evolutionary paths. The real beauty of this research is that it pushes us to think more deeply about what personality really is and how it manifests across the incredible diversity of life. It also shows the power of scientific pluralism, allowing for different approaches and methods to contribute to our understanding. Future research will likely continue to refine our understanding of ape personalities using even more sophisticated tools and perspectives, bridging the gap between human and animal minds. What do you think about this research? Do you believe there are core personality traits shared across all great apes, or do you think they are fundamentally different? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into animal psychology, be sure to like this video, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more mind-bending science, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Until then, keep your curiosity sharp.